Hi, welcome to my first podcast. My name is Leah Bromberg, and I am doing this for Professor Proctor's Convergent Divergent Media class. Today, I am joined by two people from my hometown, and we are going to be talking about specifically our experience growing up in Newtown, Connecticut, especially in the past 5 years. So today I am joined by
Brooke Hackcraft
and Rebecca Spelvieri.
So we are going to get started. So thank you for being here.
Yep.
Thanks for having us.
So this is a very serious topic that is in the media a lot. I do want to tie this into the media because I am taking a media class right now. I want to talk about the importance of the Parkland kids and the voice that they are giving to survivors like us. So first of all, I think it would be important to share our experiences on the day that the Sandy Hook shooting happened. I feel like Brooke and I have a very similar experience because we were in the same place at the same time.
Right.
Yeah. Brooke and I were both in Newtown High School when this happened, and Rebecca was at Newtown Middle School. And I remember you gave a speech recently at one of the events at Manhattanville, and you, like, when I was listening to you talk, it seemed very much like I remembered that I had this exact same experience.
Right. I mean, we heard the same helicopter sounds above our school and heard the same announcements on the loudspeaker, and it's just so surreal in that moment to think, is this actually happening? You know?
But I remember being in biology class, and our teacher had us go to the library, and I was studying in the library, and I remember just going into lockdown for a good 3 hours just in a closet, and I remember that so vividly.
Yeah.
And I assume that you were in a classroom.
Right. So I actually was not in a structured class period, so there was the glass hallway that connected the new addition to the music hallways. So I was studying there with all of my papers laid out, and I was with Kelsey, one of my friends, and we were just studying like old times, and then out of nowhere, one of the security guards just didn't yell at us, but just, you knew something was going on because of the tone in his voice, and if you had to just get to the nearest classroom. So I actually went into a choir room, which is ironic because I had never stepped foot into the choir room since I don't sing, but it was just crazy not to know what was going on for the entirety until the end of the drill.
And it was hours and hours.
Yeah.
And I have no idea what you experienced in the middle school, but I'm assuming it's similar.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you guys are only like a couple blocks away from Sandy Hook because it's much closer. We were like across town, and I remember hearing like cop cars. We were like in the front where my math class was. I was in math, and we heard the cop cars go by, and we were all pretty scared. I mean, we're all like a little bit younger. I mean, it's scary for everyone, but we're a little bit younger, so we're more like we have no idea. We're just doing what our teacher is telling us to do. And the principal came on the loudspeaker and was like, it sounded very urgent. Like, you heard an urgency in her voice. It wasn't just like, a normal like lockdown practice drill. It was very like urgent, and my math teacher just went all around the room, like, closing the blinds to the windows, like just telling us to sit down. And it was just like really scary. It was really,
How long were you in lockdown? Probably the same.
Yeah, no, probably the same amount. It felt like 5 hours. It felt really long.
It felt really long.
Yeah, no, it felt so long. And I remember getting out of school, and it was already like just all the traffic. Like, it took like an hour to get home that day, I think, on the bus. And we were not even that far away, but it just took like so much longer than it usually does, like a 10-minute bus ride, turning into an hour.
Did you take the bus afterwards?
Yeah.
Okay.
I took the bus home. That's why it was like so long. And yeah, no.
I remember my parents came and picked me up, and they were like, they had no idea. Yeah. They had no idea what was going on because everybody just Well, I remember, so something I do want to tie into this podcast is the difference in technology. For example, like during the Parkland shooting, everybody could take out Snapchat and record videos, and, you know, that's a whole nother thing I want to get into later. But I remember when we were in high school, we had, like, flip phones, and
I remember my purple one.
I also had a purple flip phone, so I, like, had my flip phone, and I was, like, texting my friends, but I couldn't, you know, like, be on social media at the time. I couldn't, like, people did have iPhones, but not in the same way that they do now. And so it's very interesting to see what we experienced in 2012 be so different in 2018 for those ways.
And they're definitely strict about having your phones out during, you know, lockdown drill. And since this one was, like, so serious, you know, you wouldn't think they're going to let you take it out. But this kid in my class had an iPod, I remember. And my teacher was like, can I just, like, look, see what's going on? Because we were all, like, so curious, even my teacher. And my teacher was like, you know, I'm really not supposed to. But, like, I'll let you to calm you down so you guys just feel at ease. And he found something about the shooting. And she was like, put it away.
But the thing that was so interesting is the amount of miscommunication that's going on. Because I remember, like, the first thing that I heard was there was an active shooter at Dickinson Park.
Yeah.
Dickinson Park is, like, right near my house, so I, like, was freaking out. That was the first thing that I heard.
Yeah.
And then did you hear the rumor that it was going to be Newtown High School?
Yes, I remember that.
I heard that rumor, and
People
I was
were nervous about that.
nervous.
Parents were freaking out. They were like, it's at the high school.
Because I heard that rumor at the time of pickup, and I can't recall how I heard it, but I just remember hearing it because my dad was picking me up from school. I'm like, how is he allowed to still pick me up from school and I'm allowed to be out of lockdown if we're supposedly next? Because we had no collection. Was the killer caught? Like, we were just so at a loss of information.
Yeah. And that does have to do with the, I don't want to say lack, but the difference in technology now. Because I remember hearing that there was a shooting at Dickinson Park. Then it was someone at Sandy Hook. I heard it was someone got shot, but they were okay because they were shot in the foot.
Yeah, I heard that there was just many kids injured, but there was no, like, deaths at first,
I remember hearing it was just the principal. Then I heard it was one teacher. Then I heard it was 2 kids. Then I heard it was 3 kids. Then I heard it was more kids. And then I didn't really realize until I was actually going past Mrs. Scholas's classroom, the big fishbowl that we have at the high school, and I could see on the screen it said 26 people. And I remember it just kept going up and up and up, and it was just such a disconnect that when you're locked in a closet, when you're locked in a choir room, when you're locked in a math classroom, you just don't have for several hours. And it's sort of like the world is finding out before you are.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I remember the next class I had after lockdown was, well, obviously we didn't do any work in the class.
But I remember going to class afterwards.
That was weird.
We went to class afterwards.
Just, I was in child development, and
We did. We went
I went to art class.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had the projector screen on with the news.
Yeah.
And every single class I went to for the remainder of the day, and we were just staring, like you said, the numbers going up. And then I remember in my math class, Shannon Mullins was saying, oh my gosh, look who just tweeted it on Twitter. And then the next person had their phone out and said, this person just tweeted us.
It was Kim Kardashian, like Jimmy Fallon, like every single celebrity. That's I think the really interesting thing about Newtown is that it's so unknown and nobody really knows.
Such a small town.
It's such a small town, and it's something that was put up on the map by this, which is so tragic.
Right.
But I remember, growing up before, I would say I was 14 or 15. I was 14 in 2012. And before that, I would have to go, oh, I'm from Newtown, and nobody knows. Nobody can put Newtown on a map because it doesn't come to mind. And I say, oh, well, it's next to Danbury. Yeah. But now if you say Newtown in any part of the country, they go, oh.
The worst, yeah.
It's
the worst part of introducing yourself.
It's uncomfortable. I remember when I was a freshman, I came to college. It's hard, especially in this area, I think, because it's something that affects a lot of people in this area. And I had to introduce myself over and over and over to 100 new people, and they're like, where are you from? And I'm like, Connecticut. And they're like, where specifically? And I'm like, Newtown. And it's just always collectively, oh.
Yeah.
Sometimes, continue.
And I always hear the same thing, where the shooting happened. And it's like the most uncomfortable thing I have to go through because, like, personally, I just don't like talking about it. But it's like, ugh.
I know.
I dread that.
And even calling it the shooting sounds so, like...
depressing.
Yeah, and tragic.
Yeah.
I know. I know a lot of us referred to it as 12/14 for the longest time, and I know that that's something that, like, the average person wouldn't be able to catch on to. But 12/14/2012 is, was the date of it, and that's something that, not the average person that isn't from there doesn't think about.
Yeah.
Right.
So what I have realized 5 years later is that I now see the world in a very, very different lens than most people. And I was wondering if the two of you had thought something similar. Because I remember I was talking to Professor Proctor, and I was talking about the way that I think and, the way that I see the world, which I didn't even really realize until talking to him. And he said, the way that you see the world is very interesting because it's through this very specific lens that you have this experience that not everyone has, but at the same time, the number keeps rising of people that have the same experience as us. Mm-hmm. And it's something that's becoming more and more common. It's just something that the kids from Parkland have in common with us. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it's something that, kids all over the country. Yeah. And I don't want to say the world because this doesn't happen all over the world. It only happens in America.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the way I've been seeing it is I kind of put myself in Parkland, the students of Parkland shoes, and I think back to the time it happened to us, and it was so new. School shootings were so rare, and that's why they say, since Sandy Hook, now this has all continued to happen. I want to think back and be like, what could I have done after the fact, like the Parkland students did, but it was totally different because this wasn't happening so much,
Yeah, it was a different time.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I had that same thought, actually, of, like, what could I have done? I almost felt invalidated of, like, why didn't I have the same reaction? And then I had the same thought of it was a different time between 2012 and 2018 because it was, like, at the time we were the deadliest. And then a few years later, it was Pulse. And then barely a few years later, 2 years later, it was Las Vegas. And then Parkland is a real, I think, turning point. But it's just like, where is next?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Where is the next shooting going to happen? Because things aren't changing.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating. Another thing I think is that I think at the time there was a lot more comfort from the government in Newtown. Do you remember when Obama came to Newtown specifically and spoke at our high school and spoke and, like, say what you want about Obama, but I'll always respect him for that.
There was a huge line going up to Newtown High School. Me and my parents were there.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Did you meet him?
No, we didn't meet him because it was too overcrowded in the auditorium, so we had to go in the gym and watch him talk from, like, the huge, like, projector in the gym. But, I mean, it was still an experience. I mean, he was still
same
in
building.
the building. Yeah, So, I mean, it was crazy.
That's amazing.
So crowded. And we waited outside for, like, an hour. It was freezing. But
yeah, because it was December.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all it happened right before Christmas. I remember that, and then we were off of school for, like,
a long time.
A while. 2, 3, 4 weeks.
Yeah. It was like,
I feel like during that time off, I was just glued to my phone, like, still in disbelief of how it happened. And I remember I was very quiet at home, and it was when I first got an iPad, and that was my form of news and social media because I had a flip phone, so all of the information I was seeing was from an iPad.
I remember that, yeah.
So I was in such disbelief.
I was on my iPod Touch. It's like I didn't leave my room for a couple days.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because everybody deals with this in different ways. I don't think that there's a right or a wrong way to deal with it.
I completely shut down. I feel like that was one of the saddest times in my life. I felt completely isolated, like in a box. I would sit, and like at the middle school, to make us feel better, they would make us draw these snowflakes, like decorate them after it happened. We did a lot of arts and crafts, I remember.
I remember that too, at the high school.
So I brought all these snowflake, like stencils or something, or like, you know, you color them and you fill them in. I brought a bunch of them home when we were like away from school, when we were off, and I just colored them and stayed completely quiet. And I just think about it, and it's like, it's so depressing for me to think about, because I was just completely shut down inside. And yeah.
And I remember a lot of people's reaction was to go out and help the community. And it's not wrong to shut down, because I had the same thing. I didn't leave my room for several days. I was glued to my iPod Touch, just going through Twitter, going through everything. I made it a thing to reply to every single message I got. I know I got messages from people I hadn't talked to in like 10 years. I got messages from people all over the world. Like, I remember, like, 2012, I had a lot of, like, internet friends. And I remember, like, Australia and, like, Germany, and all these people from all these places are like, are you okay? I know that you live there, and I thought of you immediately. And it's just really difficult. But I remember almost feeling invalidated, because I remember a lot of students, especially I think in our grade, Brooke, that went out and helped the community and wanted to help each other and wanted to be out as much as possible. And that's not wrong either, but everybody, I think, deals with this differently. And, you know, it's also not wrong to have a very visceral reaction and start international outcry and start the March for Our Lives. And I'm personally very inspired by the Parkland kids.
Yeah.
I was wondering both of your opinions on that.
Well, I wasn't at the march, but I found it so incredible that these young individuals that experience the same thing, similar to how we experience, put this whole thing together.
Yeah.
I think that's inspiring, and then some.
Yeah. No, they're taking a stand. They're changing things. I mean, I think when it happened to us, we didn't do that, but I think it was because, like what we said before, it was newer for us. But like what they're doing now, I mean, like, we're here for it. We support them. We went through that same thing. I mean, even people from Newtown are coming over to support them. I mean, we're all in it together, and I feel like it's amazing. And, you know, I feel like there will be a change. I feel it.
I also really think it's great that they specifically are giving us a voice, because I remember when I went to the March for Our Lives, like, Jackson Middleman was up there. I was like, I know him, I know him. And like a bunch of kids from Newtown were just standing on the stage and speaking so beautifully, and it's just, that was really great to see. And it's bringing, you know, unfortunately, kids together from all over the country, but under negative circumstances, obviously. But I do think there's a difference in a lot of ways. There's difference in media. There's difference in the politics of it all, because I remember how Obama was so loving and caring towards our town specifically, and took all the time that he needed to go to each room with each survivor and do everything. And I remember I personally was very infuriated when I saw the pictures of Trump when he went to the hospital and took, you know, photos with a thumbs up next to the survivors of this terrible, terrible tragedy. So
really,
did you see that?
No, I did not even hear about that. Wow.
He went to very specific places of the hospital and saw survivors and like posed with them and like did thumbs up.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's just, I think that caused also a lot of outrage that fueled this fire. I think the biggest reason is I personally thought that 26 children and educators was enough to make change. I had a lot of faith in our government that those lives were going to be important enough to make the changes, and unfortunately they were not. I'm not sure if you had a similar thought, but
I think I thought the same thing, because 26 is such a big number. I never went to Sandy Hook School, although I lived closer to it. The bus systems were very weird, but I remember playing sports there, and the school is pretty small, and to think that that happen.
And there's so many kids that are our age and older, and you and Rebecca's age, that have gone to this school and grew up in
my school.
That was your school?
Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I know that in Newtown there are 4 separate elementary schools, so it was sort of assumed that everyone that was in the town went to Sandy Hook, but that isn't the case, because I know that I went to Hedda Meadow. You also...
I went to Middlegate.
You went to Middlegate. I wasn't sure exactly where you went.
Which is ironic because, as I said, I live closer to Sandy Hook and I live in Sandy Hook, but the way the bus works sent me to...
And as you said, you went to Sandy Hook.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was very scary. Like, yeah. I knew one of the teachers, Victoria Soto. We did, I think, like homework club, and I loved her. I adored her, and it was like it hit a place for me that just like I can't even describe it.
The thing that I think is really interesting, that even if you don't directly know someone, you know someone's brother, you know someone's sister, you know someone.
One of my neighbors. Yeah,
exactly. My math teacher, her mom.
Yeah, my teammate's mom.
So it's like even if you don't directly know someone, you know someone if you're from this town. And it's really, really, really devastating. And it's something that doesn't go away. Yeah. And it's something that still really hurts 5 years later, especially when things like Parkland happens and the wound is open again over and over and over.
I mean, talking about it right now stings a lot, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that's proof that it doesn't go away.
Is it difficult to also write about, or does it almost feel cathartic? Because I want to ask you specifically, Rebecca, because I know you are writing a paper for Proctor on basically the same topic.
Sometimes I like to take breaks from it just to be like, gotta cool myself down. It's not more sad. I thought it was gonna trigger me a little bit more and I was gonna be more like sad writing it, but instead I feel very like angry, like just a lot of anger inside. So that's kind of how it feels for me to be writing it.
I agree with that. It's really a range of emotions between anger and loss and frustration and confusion and disappointment, and it's all these things, but I think that's, for myself personally, has fueled some of the greatest forms of art I've ever made, whether it be writing, whether it be podcasts, whether it be installation artwork, whether it be film. And all of these things are things that I've done and I'm proud of through, loss and gun violence and these very intense personal experiences that I've had that I've realized not everyone does have. But yeah, I think it's really important to sit down and think about it and produce art and produce things that are valuable to others, because I do think that we see the world through a very, very interesting and I don't even want to say unique lens, because it's not very unique at this point.
But to add on to what you were saying about earlier, how we all cope differently, even to this day, coping is in the form of writing, speaking together, and different art forms like you were discussing. And for me, especially with the changes that are hoping to be made in the Parkland students, I feel like what I can do at least is write, speak about it, and even if it's in a small community and not in as wide of a crowd as March for Our Lives. So I think that's pretty empowering. And I remember the first article I published was our freshman year here at Manhattanville College, and I didn't want to write it without Leah right next to me because I was so worried about I have to get the details correct and I can't say anything wrong because it's so touchy to our community that you don't want to mess up.
That's how I feel about my paper. I don't want to mess it up. Because it's important to me, and I feel like it's important to share my story for our community. And
I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really powerful in itself.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important to share the story because people just see what they see on TV,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
Right.
something that not everyone has to deal with constantly,
Yeah.
and it's something that doesn't go
Mhm.
away
Yeah.
ever.
And think of the media hoaxes. So Alex Jones, for a while, our town was shook again when that really was on the news about his saying Sandy Hook was a hoax. And hearing that, I was like, are you kidding me? You can say those words and see all the news reports that date back and hear all of our stories and still say that. So that was probably one of the things that shook me the most. Because how can a man say that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it really hurt or burned when he was in the White House.
Yes.
A Sandy Hook denier was in the White House. I mean, he's not anymore or whatever, but like, it's just things that, these aren't deal breakers for people.
Mm-hmm.
That is really frustrating.
Right.
And in our class, we're reading a book about hoaxes and fake news and all these things. So it's one of the biggest like hoaxes, one of the biggest conspiracy theories that, guess what, this never happened.
Mm-hmm.
And people have told me to my face that this has never happened, and that's just something that's so insensitive, because I think of my math teacher doesn't have a mom, your neighbor isn't alive, you know,
Mm-hmm.
people, I remember like Alondra used to babysit one of these kids. It's just
Yeah.
it hurts so much to
Mhm.
to feel invalidated in that way.
Right.
And it's just like, it's something that you can't even talk about. Like it doesn't, the words aren't even coming out right now, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's just really frustrating. But at the same time, if you think that it is a conspiracy theory, or you think that these people are crisis actors, it makes it easier to not care,
Yeah.
to not feel empathy, to not be kind, and to not
Which
put
is
yourself...
everything our town stood for: be kind,
Exactly.
love one another, love wins. All of those sayings bloomed from such a tragedy.
We are Sandy Hook. We choose love.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes it easier. I've realized that if you think that these people are crisis actors, if you think that this thing never happened, if you look at the evidence and all these things, and I want to tie this into what we were talking about earlier, that the Parkland kids were getting a lot of criticism for taking out their phones and just taking videos and Snapchatting these gunshots and putting it on the internet so everyone can see. And the initial backlash was, why would you do that? These kids are insane. Like, they are so addicted to their phones, or so glued to technology that they can't put it down even if they're about to like die. But my first thought was, of course they're gonna get video and photo evidence of this happening, or else they'll say it never happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big
smart. Yeah.
that's a big thing about what happened in Sandy Hook.
Yeah.
And what happened in our high school, and with our flip phones. And
Well, in our generation, it's like, take a picture or video or it didn't happen.
Yeah.
yeah,
Like, we have to see proof that people died, and it's like, it's actually kind of sick. Yeah.
it is. And I almost like commended those kids for taking the photos, taking the videos, because nobody can, I mean, people still do say that it didn't happen, but
Yeah.
it makes it harder when there's photo evidence. And I remember them specifically getting backlash. And I thought about the difference between 2018 and 2012 when we experienced this.
Right.
Because I didn't have the exact capabilities of really even doing that if I was in that situation. And then you think back in Columbine, that was in the 90s. And I don't know, people can argue like, oh, that wasn't a hoax because there's the surveillance footage and this was released and this wasn't released and this person had an open casket and this, like, it's just the way that these, I want to say communities, these towns, these individuals have to almost prove their trauma is really, really disheartening.
Which is also detrimental to their own grieving process, because
agree.
while they're healing, they also have to prove to people that this happened.
also tying in with the media again, I wanted to bring back to the point. I wanted to talk about this earlier, but it's all right that we're talking about it now. I wanted to talk about the aftermath when we went back to school, about all the news reporters and all the trucks and all the and all the people in our faces and the people pounding down. Yeah.
I think I could say something about that for now. I live maybe a mile or two from school, so taking the bus was longer than getting driven to school. But my dad would drop me off at school, and we would be stuck behind the line of cars entering Newtown High School, and there's nowhere to go. So next thing you know, there's cameramen right next to your window, and you don't know what to do. Like, hi, I'm grieving. What
I'm
else?
trying to learn and go back to school and see my
and
friends.
feel safe again and be normal, but you're all up in my face. I think that there's borderline between when video coverage is needed, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, because I remember not being able to get into the high school because the news trucks literally blocked the entrance of the high school.
Right.
I remember it took me an hour or two to just go to my class. And it's like they'll talk to anybody. They'll talk to anybody because they just want
coverage.
They want coverage. They want viewership. They need the money. And I think to tie into that, it's really interesting because I went to the March for Our Lives in Washington, and I really do like talking to people, and I really do like sharing my story, exactly how we were saying earlier. But I went up to someone specifically and didn't say, like, I had a sign that said Sandy Hook stands with Parkland. It said Columbine, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook stands with Parkland. And a lot of people got the reference and got that I was a Sandy Hook, a Newtown resident, and a lot of people understood, but it wasn't, I liked the way that I did my sign because it was there, but it wasn't totally implied. So I remember I talked to this guy with a camera. He wasn't like a huge news reporter or whatever. He must have been doing his own thing. I don't know. So I asked him if he needed an interview, and he was like, yeah, sure, I'll take one more, like a casual, like whatever. So he like zooms in on my sign, zooms in on my face, and he goes, okay, so can you share a few things about yourself? And so I'm like, okay, my name is Leah Bromberg. I'm from Newtown, Connecticut. And he like stopped. He like stopped what he was doing, and I could like see like the gears turning, and he was like, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Like, he's like, I got one. It was almost like that kind of like thing. Like, but I share my story, and I didn't feel offended by that, but it was just sort of like, I didn't think about it that much until I went to my brother Jason, and I was like, yeah, he had that reaction when I said where I was from, and he said, oh, well, you know, the dollar signs are just going around his head. Like, yeah, it's something that is important to share, but at the same time can be very commercialized and very like watered down and very, I'm like at a loss for the exact word, but it's very like
we can use your hurt, we can use your story for our thing.
Benefit.
Yeah.
I feel like getting coverage is important because we all need to be educated about current events and things going on in the country. But what was the benefit of recording us getting driven in our car to school, just a live feed of our cars just pulling into the high school? What is there video? Is video really necessary to cover that, or can one person be there and say Newtown High School is going back to school, let them recover?
It is a news story, but it also is one thing to record a news story and to get up in everyone's faces and to block the entrance and to
That's exactly.
And it's something that like the three of us can go through our lives, and it is a part of our identity, but it's not our, like, for example, I know Jason, maybe you can help me out. I don't remember his name exactly, if it's Jacob or James Barden.
James Barden.
James Barden. is friends with my brother, and I remember we as a family went to the March for Our Lives, and Jason got a text from James Barden, who lost his brother directly in the classroom of Sandy Hook, and my brother read this text, and he said, "Oh, James thanks us. James thanks us for going as a family and supporting that and giving him a voice." And then I realized people like James Barden can't go to these events. They can't go. I mean, they could, maybe to speak or something, but it's like, if people realize you lost your brother, you're gonna be
talked to.
I mean, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with being talked to, but there's a difference between being talked to respectfully and
being harassed.
Hunted down, and harassed, swarmed.
Right.
Yeah, no.
And I got that from the reaction that I had from the people that I got interviewed by. I remember I got interviewed by a French news site. That was interesting. They were very like, we're just covering what's going on in America because we don't understand this. And I was like, good, this doesn't happen anywhere else. But I mean, not that either of these people were disrespectful, but it's just sort of like this reaction when you find someone from Newtown. You're like, oh shit, this is good for me. Yeah, I can benefit from this for my own self.
Yeah, the news was definitely very invasive. I remember one of the news trucks actually came into our neighborhood and like pulled up, like not directly like in front of our house, but like on the side near our house. And my parents were like freaking out, like, don't go to the door if they come knocking. They were going out knocking on my other neighbors' doors. And I think they were like going down the line of houses. And I don't think my parents were home. I think they went to the store. And just to go to the Big Y, the local supermarket, it took like an hour because, I don't know if you remember, but all the traffic, the cars were moving like so slow, like it was insane. And my parents were just like, yeah, if, my brother, I think he was on the phone or something, like, oh, there's a news truck, like, I don't know what to do. Like, my parents were just like, don't open the door if they come knocking.
And it's something that affected us for months afterwards in 2012, but it's something that affects us now, 5 years later, and it's something that will affect us forever.
Yeah.
I don't think it's inherently bad to talk to the media, but it is something to ask for an interview or to go up to someone and willingly give an interview than going to random people in Newtown and knocking on their houses.
That's crazy.
Going up to the houses.
Like perhaps sending email or a phone call. Maybe.
But I mean, if you're someone like James Barden, you're going to get 10,000 emails and phone calls. So it's like, it's just something that doesn't go away. And another thing that I just remembered is a lot of the students that were, I think, about 6 years old, 4 years old, and so on, are growing up 5 years later, have a voice to speak to the media, and I think that's very important. So I think it's important to hear their stories, but it's something that's really interesting that in 2018 we are hearing stories of kids that were in the building. And I think that's another difference between Newtown and Parkland, because these were children. They were 4-year-olds, they were 6-year-olds. They don't have the voice, they don't have the capabilities of starting the revolution, and we thought that their lives would speak for them. But what happened in Parkland, it was high school. Kids are very articulate. High schoolers basically are adults at this point. They have the capabilities to stand up, and they have the technology to say, here are my Snapchat videos, here's this, I knew this person, this and that. And it speaks volumes, and it gives us a voice, definitely.
Right. And think about, like, the Sandy Hook kids that survived, and like you said, their young age. They can't possibly comprehend in words at that young of an age what they could have felt or could have happened.
Well, how do you even explain that to someone?
It's such a shock, especially I know so many of them dealt with post-traumatic stress disorder, and because they don't understand how to cope with such a traumatic event. They're kids. They're not supposed to experience this. Yeah. None of us are, but especially kids.
I agree with that. it's something that still affects us now because, I mean, for many reasons, but I remember, I'm sure it's difficult for the school to be, for you specifically, since you went to the school, for it to be torn down and rebuilt.
Yeah. With that, I feel like when I heard they were tearing down the school, I remember, like, I sobbed. I was crying because, you know, I remember being there. I remember my teachers. I remember a friendly, like, place. I grew up there. I was, you know, and I mean, now being older, being able to understand more, of course I agree with them tearing it down. You can't expect kids to go back into that building. That's terrifying. I would never do it. But back then, like, I was only, like, heartbroken. I was like, don't tear down the school. And that sounds crazy. It really does, because, like, how would you expect them to go there?
But at the same time, the Parkland kids went back to school too, like, a week later in the same school building.
Right. Yeah.
So what even is the...
I could never.
And
I couldn't.
The whole clear backpacks will solve our problems, if you heard about that, where the Parkland school is enforcing, like, giving each student a clear backpack that they need to bring to avoid these problems ever again, as if that will solve, Did you hear about that?
I actually never heard of that.
Yeah, so all the students that go to Parkland now are still going to the same school building, what happened with us is we were out of school for so long, mostly because of the winter break. This happened 12/14, so right before Christmas. And so that's why we were off for so long, but the Parkland kids went right back, and I just was in complete disbelief.
Yeah, that just makes me feel uneasy. Like, I don't even have words for that. Like, no, I don't know.
And it's especially frustrating because they've started this international outcry, and they've done all this work, and they're getting traction, and then they're forced to go back to the same school where this happened. The new Sandy Hook school is really gorgeous. It's really beautiful. Like, they tore it down, but then remade this.
I can't go there.
Yeah.
I thought about going there. I think my parents went there. I think they were going to take me, but I was just like, I can't go there. And, you know, my mom was talking to me about it. She said, I think it'd be good for you because you move on, you don't, you know, you can't just not, you know, but, like, I just was like, I can't, like, growing up there and then that happening in that spot in that building, even though it's a whole new building, I'm like I can't go back there. It's just...
And that's completely valid. Yeah. Did you visit the new school?
I didn't get to go inside of the school, but it was the summertime and it was open, so I drove and just walked around the perimeter of the front of the school and was just
beautiful.
Amazed. My jaw actually dropped. How they could build such a beautiful school.
And yeah, I remember I went when they were, like, giving tours when it first opened, and, like, I don't feel the same way as you because I didn't go to Sandy Hook. I went to Hedda Meadow. So it's like I didn't have a connection. But I know so many people that did. And it's just really, really heartbreaking. And it's bittersweet because it is a really beautiful building. So much money and so much love and so much effort went into this. But at the same time, it's like during the tearing down and rebuilding, you know, all these children being relocated to, I think it was Monroe?
Yeah.
Chalk Hill.
I went there.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for an audition. It was nice. It kind of reminded me of the original Sandy Hook, actually, a little bit.
It's cute.
I felt the vibes when I walked in.
The vibes.
I was even nervous going there, though. It was weird. Very weird. I was even nervous just going there.
It's interesting to have these kids grow up and 5 years later to hear their stories, and they are valid. I think everyone that was there has a valid experience, no matter who you lost or where you were. Like, I have people even from towns surrounding Newtown that went into lockdown, and yes, it's different, and yes, they don't know exactly, but it's, you know, I'm not one to invalidate them because they went into lockdown. They didn't know what was going on. You know, you were in the middle school, we were in the high school, so it's like we can't even say. It's just, I don't know. When I went to the March for Our Lives, I almost went through, like, I was explaining myself as, I don't think that I'm a survivor. I don't see myself as a survivor because I wasn't in the building.
That's how I feel. But then people talk to you, they're like, your story is so compelling, you're a survivor, like, and I'm like, I never thought of myself as a survivor, you know? I thought I would have to be in that building where it took place. And to be called a survivor, like, I don't know, that made me feel, I don't know, I can't even explain it, like, actually, but it made me feel, like, really good, actually, you know?
Who called you a survivor?
I think it's actually Professor Proctor. In our, we were emailing back and forth about, like, my paper, like, he emailed me and was like, looks good, I love the work you're doing here. I was like, thank you, told me to talk with you, and he was like, your story, you know, it's compelling, you know, I know there's other survivors like you out there. And I was like, he was like the first person I think that called me a survivor, and I was like, wow. I was like, that's wild.
Well, I think from the outside, like, looking in from people like Professor Proctor, they relate us with the town, so it's almost like we survived the tragedy in itself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think there's probably different references of survival that can be used, but I definitely, if I were to hear that, I would associate it with being in the building.
Yeah.
But hearing you say that, I think that might be the context, too.
Yeah. No, I didn't think he was saying it because, you know, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think it only means, you know, if you were in the building or not. I think survivor has a bigger meaning to it. It's like,
I agree.
You know, coming from where I came from, handling that, like, we all handled it. You know,
you survived.
Yeah.
You survived and overcame and live your life, and it affects everyone in the town.
Right.
And I had a very similar experience to you because I went to the march and I talked to a couple interviewers and I said I wouldn't describe myself as a survivor because I wasn't in the building. I didn't go to Sandy Hook. I didn't know anyone very directly. I know, you know, many people very indirectly, which hurts in its own way, but at the same time, I wouldn't call myself a survivor because I wasn't in the building, but at the same time, we didn't know if we were in the building or not. That was my biggest thing, that we didn't know what was going on. And the fact that you have to actually pass the high school to get to the original Sandy Hook is, and the rumors and everything, I didn't know if I was in the building or not.
Mm-hmm.
So I was telling this when I went to Washington, D.C., I was talking to an Uber driver. And I was, like, telling him this story, and he goes, that is so interesting. Like, genuinely, like, caring so much. And he goes, I think you need to stop telling yourself that you're not a survivor. And I was like, what? Like, in the back of this Uber. And he was like, Leah, I think you are a survivor. I don't think surviving something, you know, from what you've told me, I don't think surviving equates with only being in the building because it affected everyone in your community. From what you've told me, you are definitely a survivor. And I was like in the back of this Uber and I was like, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. It was like midnight on the night of March for Our Lives, and I was just talking about my experience and what it meant to me, and he told me, you are a survivor, and it was really validating, and it was just, it comes
from...
It's
a good feeling.
It comes when you don't expect it.
Mm-hmm.
Your professor casually mentioning it in the back of an Uber, you know, just in passing, and it's something that was really empowering, and, like, I was like, oh my gosh. It's good, I'm interested in hearing that you've had a similar experience.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. And Brooke is a survivor as well. Like, you speak very articulately about this. You have the very similar I don't want to say same, a very similar experience that I have. But the way that you articulated it at a podium was very compelling. And, like, I remember this was at a event on our campus, but it was like I could feel the tears welling up, and it's like, that's my experience. I know what she's talking about, and it's very important to speak on.
Mm-hmm. Because telling your story is so important, and it reminds me of in high school there was a teacher, Mr. Keylock, and he was doing story exchanges, and it's where we were able to this is really brief, but we were able to connect with a student from a totally different country. We would Skype each other, and then we would tell each other a story in our lives, and then have to retell it based on what we've heard. So we would retell someone else's story. So I feel like just the passion to tell a story is so important because it builds empathy in our communities, you would hope.
Yeah, you would, yes.
You would hope.
I think it does. I think all of our stories are very compelling, and I think that it is definitely, it's not even something I think, it is something that is part of our identities for the rest of our lives. And it's something, like, for example, when I studied abroad in Japan was the first time that I even, got away from introducing myself to people and people going, oh. Because in Japan, people don't think about this. People don't think about gun violence. When I was in Japan, this year's deadliest mass shooting in American history happened in Las Vegas, and I was trying to explain this to one of my Japanese friends, and it's just it doesn't click. It doesn't click in their minds because it's just not something that they have to think about. But when you live in America, it's something that you live in constant fear of. Yeah. And that's something that I want to end on, because when I was talking to Professor Proctor, I was talking about this lens, or he expressed to me that he thought I saw the world in a very interesting lens when I was telling him that I'm genuinely scared to do anything in America because what's stopping someone from going and shooting me?
I've had literally the same thoughts, sitting in a high school classroom, not so much here, but just in high school, I'd be sitting at a desk and I'd be imagining, my brain would go to other places, what if some random guy just came in with a gun? And I feel sitting there in a classroom having those thoughts, that's just not normal. That's a scary thought. I shouldn't have to, my brain shouldn't have to go to that place. I shouldn't be thinking that.
Yeah, and I think that's something that happens with a lot of kids from our town specifically, but I'm sure Parkland too, and every other town affected by these things all over the country. It's something that your mind immediately goes to. When I go to concerts, when I'm in a large crowd of people, when I went to the March for Our Lives, I was like, what is stopping someone from getting up on one of the rooftops and killing all of us?
My mom, that's the main reason she won't let me go to any marches, and it honestly, it's so upsetting to me because I want to be a part of that. That's crazy. You're going to Washington, D.C., that's an experience, and I explained that to her. I was we had a whole conversation back and forth, a fight even. I started crying because it just meant that much to me. I wanted to go. I wanted my voice heard just as much as everyone, I wanted to be a part of that. But I can't because she's too afraid. She's you don't know what's going to happen there. And she's right. When it comes down to it, she is right.
She's right.
We almost don't know what's going to happen anywhere. It could even be a restaurant, something small, something big.
Supermarket. I've thought about it in the supermarket. It's always in the back of all of our minds, definitely.
And that's something that I expressed to Professor Proctor, and he expressed to me that that's a lens that it's what happens 5 years later. It's something that never really goes away until their change is made. That this is a thought, and that's where my brain immediately goes to, but not everyone goes there.
Yeah, I feel it was even a thought for me before it happened, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I had a weird experience with my mom after the movie theater. Is that what it was?
The Aurora?
Yeah. No, it was Las Vegas, right?
Which one?
Or no, Colorado.
Which one?
It was at the movie theater. Yeah, true.
Was it
Which
the Batman?
one?
Yeah.
Yeah,
the
Batman
because
premiere. Yeah.
Aurora.
Yeah, that happened the summer before 12/14.
It did.
That was the summer of, yeah. And it's actually so crazy. I think about this all the time. I wrote about it in my paper. I asked my mom, I was so afraid, because we were going to see a movie. We were going to see Spider-Man. I think it just come out that summer. And I was tense about it. And I was like, do you think that something like that would ever happen in our town? And my mom was very reassuring. She was like, no, bad things happen everywhere, but we're fine. And that is something that actually gets to me. It's so upsetting to think about. I actually asked my mom that, and months later, just a few months later, it actually happened to us.
But as a parent, what can you even say?
I mean, yeah. No, actually. Because it's like she doesn't want to say, yeah, it could happen here, it could happen anywhere.
But that's the truth. That's the truth. And
yeah.
Newtown is one of the safest places in the country,
mm-hmm.
by far. Mm-hmm. Parkland is apparently one of the safest places in the country, by far. And it's just, when these things are, I mean, of course gun violence happens everywhere. It happens in Chicago and all these separate elements of this problem that are important, and I think it's important that the March for Our Lives gives that a voice, but mm-hmm. you know it's especially a problem when things are happening in Newtown and Parkland, where these things it shouldn't happen anywhere, but especially when it's hitting those areas specifically.
But it's surprising.
It's surprising.
It's such a quiet town. Newtown is so quiet. Like, people haven't heard about us before the shooting, and so they don't really know much about our town. They don't know that it's a quiet place.
Exactly, and that's one of the things I mentioned in my speech is we have so many beautiful buildings that hold so much history, but that is hidden behind the tragedy that hit our town.
Yeah.
Yeah, you haven't heard about us before. You haven't heard about us afterwards. It's really frustrating, actually.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating for, us to be known in that way. And it's, frustrating in the same way that we're not the only ones.
Yeah.
And it's continuing to be more kids, and it's continuing to be more families, and it's continuing to be more communities falling apart and rebuilding themselves, unfortunately. And yes, it brings us together, but it's something that shouldn't happen to begin with. That's an interesting thing that you brought up with your mom and that conversation. I'm still thinking about that. It makes me think about my parents, because I know that they specifically, I remember they moved, because I remember when I was born in Manhattan, and then they moved to New Jersey, but it was, you could see the New York skyline from basically our house in New Jersey. And then right after 9/11, they moved, of course. But I think it's so interesting that they specifically chose Newtown, Connecticut because it was safe and because they had good schools.
They have great schools.
They have great schools. Yeah. And nobody wants to move here now. And these, houses aren't selling, and class sizes are getting smaller, and yeah, there's a beautiful school, but how many kids are going to go there? Who wants to go there?
Right.
I wouldn't want my kids to go there personally.
Yeah, before talking on the podcast, we spoke about the teachers in Newtown that we enjoyed having, and that's just compelling.
It's a good place to live.
Yeah.
It still is. It always was. It always will be.
No, yeah. I'm happy I grew up here. I mean, after the shooting and everything, it doesn't feel like I'm less safe now living there, if that makes sense. I still feel safe. That's still my hometown. That's still my home. It's not more dangerous now, and people just have that idea, and, I don't blame them. If I was looking at, that, I would be cautious too. Especially if I was a parent, I'd be like, I don't want to live there. I mean, to be honest, yeah.
The same thing could be said anywhere in America.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's what really gets me. That's what really gets me the most, is that it can happen anywhere. It can happen at the grocery store. It can happen at a concert. It can happen literally anywhere at any time. And I think the biggest thing is no one really cares until it happens to them.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. It's true, though.
It's true.
No one can truly empathize or understand the amount of tragedy experienced until it happens to them.
The amount of ongoing trauma that I'm experiencing later in life over and over, and you don't even realize until it creeps up on you, and you're like, oh, this is probably because of childhood traumas that are unfair. And
I mean, I think everyone took a little bit something away with it. I feel like I'm definitely more, I feel like I have a lot of more anxiety that I live with now. I feel like I didn't have a lot of anxiety before all of it, and now I just, at random times I'll have, my own set of issues. Maybe it came from that,
Yeah, and it's who's to know?
Yeah.
Because there aren't studies on these, and it's, you know, just emerging now, and all these kids are growing up, and I think that's a good place to end on, that people don't really empathize unless it happens to them. I think that's a good takeaway.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it happened to us, and it continues to happen to people across America if we don't see change. But this has been really productive. I feel so good.
Yeah.
I feel, it's really good to sit down and talk with people that have a very similar experience, that are from the same place.
Yeah.
I thought it was valuable because I had never heard a story of what someone at Newtown Middle School experienced, so sitting here was enlightening to me also.
And I think it's interesting that we have very, very similar experiences.
Yes.
But there were kids in the high school, there were kids in the middle school, there were kids in the 3 other elementary schools, there were kids in all the neighboring schools, and there were obviously everyone in Sandy Hook that we're now hearing the stories of. So I think that's very validating, and I think it's very important and empowering to share stories. Thank you so much, Brooke and Rebecca, for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Of course.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. And thank you, Professor Proctor, for suggesting that we talk together. And I think that's very important.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.